So, about a year ago, some of you may remember me talking about this, I decided to rewatch some of my favorite TV shows. I went on a full-on hardcore binge mode. And I affectionately refer to this period of my life as Dave's Binge-a-thon, Binge-a-palooza 2018. Over the course of a couple months, I rewatched 3 of my favorite sitcoms, and that totaled 362 episodes and 133 hours of entertainment. It was a fun time. Many a laugh was had. By the time I barreled through my way through these episodes, I felt both a sense of accomplishment and a little bit conflicted. You see, I was having fun binging these shows, and I wanted more. But I was a little burned out on watching shows I had already watched. So the question became, what do I watch next? And that was a hard question to answer. You see, we live in a golden age of television, my friends, between cable, Netflix, Hulu, and a million other streaming platforms. Not you, Crackle. There is no shortage of quality, creative, and entertaining shows to pick from. And all that content can be daunting to sift through. And to find a show that both seemed there was consensus was really good and would also be worthy of my time to watch. I searched out lists of the best shows currently on TV. I read articles and reviews. I polled my friends, well, the ones that I respect and have similar tastes that I do. I talked to them. I was feeling a lot of inner turmoil because I didn't want to mess this decision up. I didn't want to get it wrong. I didn't want all my research to be in vain. But luckily, all my research, reading, and polling led me to a very clear winner. And the show that I consistently found on top of the best list of TV shows currently on the air was The Good Place. Now, I'd seen commercials for The Good Place around the time that it premiered back in the fall of 2016. I thought it looked interesting, but I often don't have tons of time to add a new show into my the shows that I watch, my rotation of shows. I know Ted Danson and Kristen Bell, who star in the show, are super talented and always really, really good in what they're in. And Erica had watched the first season of The Good Place. She told me it was really good, so I made the wise decision that any smart husband would do, and that was to trust his wife. Still, my fear in consuming some sort of new art, whether it be TV, movies, or music, is that when it becomes so highly recommended, I always fear there's no way it could ever live up to the hype. I kind of felt like this might be heresy, but I kind of felt that way when I saw Black Panther. Yeah, it was really good, but everybody had said it was the most amazing movie ever, and I was like, well, it was good, but you know, sometimes there's that letdown. Luckily, when I started watching The Good Place, that was not the case for me. I was immediately sold. It was smart, it was hilarious, it was unique and creative, it presented interesting ideas and asked hard questions. The creators of the show often describe it as the smartest dumb show on television. And that's because each episode contains a moral philosophy lesson and, you know, fart jokes and stuff. And I found it pointing back to God in such a unique way. I knew almost immediately that if we decided to do a Pop Culture Jesus series again, this is what I would want to talk about. I'd want to talk about The Good Place. Because that's what this whole series is about. Looking at the unique ways God communicates His truth in the culture that we consume. God is powerful and creative and stops at nothing to try and reach us. And that extends to the TV shows and movies we watch, the music we listen to, and everything beyond that. He can reach us and teach us about His character through any of the media that we take in, regardless of the author's intentions. And The Good Place is no different. If you've never watched the show, I know some people here have, but if you've never watched the show, you may notice that I'm kind of being a little vague right now. I haven't explicitly said what the show is about. And don't worry, that's coming here in just a moment. But I wanted us to experience it all together, to walk through it together. And fair warning, there will be a pretty big spoiler during my message this morning. Despite all my best efforts, I could not figure out a way to talk about the show without spoiling something from season 1. But know that there are tons of twists and turns in this show and tons of crazy things that happen. And if you go home today and decide, I want to start watching Good Place, know that knowing this one thing does not ruin the show. I knew it before I even started watching it, and it's still such a delightful show to watch. So I do think I avoid any other spoilers pretty good. So just know that there's one big one. So what do you say? Let's take a trip to the good place.
Eleanor, come on in. Hi, Eleanor. I'm Michael. How are you today?
I'm great. Thanks for asking. Oh, one question. Where am I? Who are you and what's going on?
Right. So, you, Eleanor Shellstrop, are dead. Your life on Earth has ended, and you are now in the next phase of your existence in the universe.
Cool. Cool. I have some questions.
Thought you might.
How did I die? I don't remember.
You were in a grocery store parking lot. You dropped a bottle of something called Lonely Gal Margarita Mix for one. And when you bent down to pick it up, a long column of shopping carts that were being returned to the shopping cart collection area rolled out of control and plowed right into you.
Oof. So who was right? I mean, about all of this?
Every religion guessed about 5%, except for Doug Forsett.
Who's Doug Forsett?
Well, Doug was a stoner kid who lived in Calgary during the 1970s. One night he got really high on mushrooms, and his best friend Randy said, "Hey, what do you think happens after we die?" And Doug just launched into this long monologue where he got like 92% correct. I mean, we couldn't believe what we were hearing. That's him, actually, right up there.
Maybe my biggest question. Is this... Or...
Well, it's not the heaven or hell idea that you were raised on. But generally speaking, in the afterlife, there's a good place and there's a bad place. You're in the good place.
Yes. Death and the afterlife. Seems like a hilarious premise for a network television sitcom, right? Well, if I was creating a network TV show, it might not be my first choice of subject matter. It does tackle universal questions that we all as humans have to come to terms with. Death is something we will all have to face. And as to the question to whether there or not there is an afterlife, that question is something every single person will ask themselves at one point or another in their life. Now, when we face our own mortality, I certainly hope you and I exit this world a little more gracefully than Eleanor Shellstrop did. But we don't know when our time here will be up. So who knows? Maybe there will be a runaway bottle of Lonely Gal Margarita Mix and some renegade shopping carts in your future. I hope not, but who am I to say that that won't be the case? That said, we all could do a lot worse than being welcomed to the afterlife by the warm and calming presence of Michael. I mean, how delightful is Ted Danson? The man is just delightful. It's just such a joy. Now, as we saw in that clip, the good place doesn't really work like many of us think of the afterlife. The show certainly makes it clear up front that it is not a Christian show. In fact, it makes sure we know that it is not subscribing to any of the major world religions. All of them in the Good Place universe got a small fraction about the afterlife correct. Then there's Doug Forsett, who on a whim and a trip seemed to somehow piece 92% of it together. The show operates on a melting pot thesis of what comes next. And that is not to its detriment. Because rather than being a show about truth, it is a show about the search for truth. The show's creator, who created a bunch of other great shows like Parks and Recreation and Brooklyn Nine-Nine, said this about creating the show. The goal of the show is not to lecture a specific viewpoint, but to raise questions. And one of the ways he saw most fit to do this was by imagining what an ethical version of the afterlife would look like. We as Christians have our own idea of what living a moral and ethical life looks like. But what does living ethically look like outside of Scripture? Well, I could try and explain this to you, but I think it might be better if I have Michael explain it to you.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to your first day in the afterlife. You were all, simply put, good people. But how do we know that you were good? How are we sure? During your time on Earth, every one of your actions had a positive or a negative value, depending on how much good or bad that action put into the universe. Every sandwich you ate, every time you bought a magazine, every single thing you did had an effect that rippled out over time and ultimately created some amount of good or bad. When your time on Earth is ended, we calculate the total value of your life using our perfectly accurate measuring system. Only the people with the very highest scores, the true cream of the crop, get to come here, to the good place. And you won't be alone. Your true soulmate is here too. That's right, soulmates are real. One of the other people in your neighborhood is your actual soulmate, and you will spend eternity together. So welcome to eternal happiness. Welcome to the good place.
Seems pretty simple, right? Seems like a fair system. There's a positive point value placed on your good actions and a negative value placed on your bad actions. When your time is up, your point total is determined where you go next. And that reward seems pretty great. I mean, that looks like a nice place. Otters holding hands. To feel like that looks every day sounds amazing. Michael shows Eleanor around the neighborhood that he has created for these people to spend their eternity. There's a quaint town square, rolling hills, babbling brooks. There's no cursing in the good place. Instead of swear words, swear words are automatically replaced by words like fork and shirt and ash. There's houses built exactly to match your personality and decorated with your favorite things. There's Janet, who we met briefly earlier. She's a Siri-like being who can answer any question about the history of the universe. Then there's the Froyo. So many frozen yogurt shops. And we even have our very own Good Place's Best Yogurt sponsored Froyo machine here today. One of the most delightful things here on Earth, they make sure got into a good place. Michael takes Eleanor to her home, decorated in her favorite thing, clown paintings, shows her a screen in her home that she can relive and replay all the memories of the great things she did in her life, and he introduces her to her soulmate, Chidi. Sure, meeting someone for the first time and finding out they're your soulmate is probably a pretty heavy thing to experience, pretty intense, even in the afterlife. And maybe it's the weight of that, or it's just for the sake of transparency, assuming that they're soulmates, that Eleanor decides to confide in Chidi as they are just starting to get to know each other.
So where are you from, Chidi?
Well, I was born in Nigeria, raised in Senegal, but my work took me all over the place. Australia, Hong Kong, Paris. And now I want to say this.
Okay.
Eleanor, I have spent my entire life in pursuit of fundamental truths about the universe, and now we can actually learn about them together as soulmates. It's overwhelming.
Chidi, you'll stand by my side no matter what, right?
Of course I will.
Promise me. Say, I promise I will never betray you for any reason.
Eleanor, I swear that I will never say or do anything to cause you any harm.
Good. Because those aren't my memories. I wasn't a lawyer. I never went to the Ukraine. I hate clowns. There's been a big mistake. I'm not supposed to be here.
Wait, what?
Wow, yeah. So that changes things a little bit, doesn't it? Actually changes everything. Eleanor shatters everything we and Chidi have learned about the good place up to this point. It is no longer the extremely perfect place it seems because a mistake has been made. But maybe it was close, right? Maybe she still belongs in the good place, but they just got her confused with another one of the billion other Eleanor Shellstrops that exist in the universe. But here's the thing. The more we find out about Eleanor, the more we realize that she was not a good person. She was pretty much the exact opposite of a good person. Later on in the show, she, on more than one occasion, describes herself as an Arizona trash bag. She's from Phoenix and went to ASU. So in this building on this campus, I don't think you're going to get many complaints with that description of her. And it's actually a pretty decent description of the type of person she was on Earth and still really is in the good place. Eleanor takes that chance in confiding in Chidi, and that's a big risk. She clearly does not want to be found out. And we just heard Chidi imply and allude to the fact that he spent his whole life studying ethics and moral philosophy. What would be the right thing for him to do with this newfound information? He struggles mightily with the weight of that decision that sits before him. But before he can make a decision, before he can decide what the ethical thing to do is, things start going sideways pretty quickly. And the fabric of the good place starts being stretched and torn at its core, all because Eleanor is not supposed to be there. She hogs all the shrimp at a welcome party, then suddenly there are giant cocktail shrimp flying through the sky in the good place. She snarkily calls one of the other residents a giraffe because she's tall and skinny, and then the neighborhood is overrun by giraffes. And then a giant sinkhole appears, and some people and things start being sucked into the sinkhole. The only solution that Eleanor can think of that might stop all this chaos is for her to actually try to fit in and be a better person. Though initially reluctant, she convinces Chidi to teach her moral philosophy so she can learn to be a better person. It does not go great.
It's time to make me good, partner. How do we do it? Is there a pill I can take or something I could vape? What are you reading?
The Metaphysics of Morals by Immanuel Kant. It's a book on how to act good.
Oh, great. So you've decided to help me.
I don't know. There's 1,000 questions. Is there a moral imperative to help you? Do I have a greater obligation to my community? Are you taking someone else's spot?
Please help me, man. I swear I am worth it.
Tell me one fact that you know about me. And we spent the whole day together. You must remember something. What country am I from?
Is it racist if I say Africa?
Yes, and Africa is not a country. I am from Senegal. Do I have any siblings? Where did I go to college?
Trick question, you didn't.
I was literally a college professor. Do you not remember one single thing about me?
I bet you don't know anything about me.
You were born in Phoenix. You went to school in Tempe. You're an only child. Your favorite show is something called The Real Housewives of Atlanta. And your favorite book is Kendall Jenner's Instagram feed.
How did you know all that?
Because you are constantly talking about yourself. You are the most self-obsessed person I have ever met.
You should see Kendall Jenner's Instagram feed.
See, this is my fear about you, Eleanor. You are too selfish to ever be a good person.
Well, I think you're wrong.
What country am I from again?
Sensodyne.
That is a brand of toothpaste.
Despite how quickly Eleanor wants to become a good person, people don't just change with the flip of a switch. It takes time to change our bad habits and rewire our brains to think and act in a different way. Some of us have things about ourselves we've been working on to change for months. Some of us have things and ugly parts of ourselves that we've been working to change for years. Eventually, Eleanor does slowly, oh so very slowly, make some progress. Even to the point where she comes to the conclusion that the only thing she can do next is to confess to everyone that she is not who they think she is. And to her surprise, these friends that she has made in the good place come around to support her and see if there's any way they can help her stay in the good place. This group of people, we've met Eleanor and Chidi, Michael and Janet, also includes Tahani, a highly intelligent British socialite, and Jianyu, a monk who has taken a vow of silence, who we also learn, much like Eleanor, is in a case of mistaken identity and is also Jason Mendoza, an aspiring DJ from Jacksonville, Florida. Duval. They all come together to see if they can help raise Eleanor's points so she can be good enough to stay in the good place. So do they succeed? Does Eleanor get enough points to stay in the good place? That is a good question. And as I said earlier, the good place is about the search for truth. But it's about the search for truth and what that search means for people who are trying to figure out how to live life well. And it asks questions in the face of the unknown of it all. Jesus tells us that it's good to wonder, it's good to question, and it's even good to doubt. Because the more we do, he promises us that God will be there for us with the answers. Keep on asking and you will receive what you ask for. Keep on seeking and you will find. Keep on knocking and the door will be open to you. So what are some of the questions that the good place raises? How does this show's worldview lead us back to God? The first question the good place asks is, can we just do good things? It would seem like trying to be a better person and do good deeds would be enough. But as Eleanor finds out, it's just not that simple. After throwing a big party for the whole neighborhood to apologize for all the weird and crazy chaos that she's been causing by being in the good place and for her presence there, Eleanor comes to a sobering realization.
Eleanor, great job tonight. Have you checked the ticker? I could really use some good news.
Okay. Oh, come on.
Well, the nightmare continues. The nightmare continues.
How did this not work? There is no way to increase my point total because everything I'm doing is out of self-preservation.
I don't understand.
My motivation is corrupt. Even when I do nice things, I'm only doing them so I can get something out of it, the ability to stay here, which means none of this had any real moral value. It doesn't count.
That's right. Motivation matters, both for Eleanor and for us. This is ultimately the problem with the ethics and different moral philosophies that Chidi is trying to teach on the show. What is good is not a simple question for us to solve in and of itself. Our intent and our motivation matters. If I hold the door for an elderly woman as I'm walking into the store, is that a good act? Yes. But if I am doing it in hopes that she gives me a tip, or even just to expect her to say thank you for my kind act, it is no longer a good act. It is built out of selfishness and greed. This nice old lady may not know my motivation, but I do, and it affects my heart and my soul. Jesus talks about heart condition and motivation and how that can differentiate us from the rest of the world. You have heard that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be children of your Father in heaven. He causes his sun to rise on the evil and good and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. If you love those who love you, what reward will you get? Are not even the tax collectors doing that? And if you greet only your own people, what are you doing more than others? Do not even pagans do that. Be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect. No pressure from that last verse there. Doing a good thing because it is easy is still good. But Jesus says even the tax collectors, some of the most vilified people in Jesus' time, were doing that. But doing the good and right thing, even though it is incredibly difficult, shows a different heart, a godly heart, a more purely motivated heart. And blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Eleanor does try to make her intentions pure, but motivations and intentions seem to keep coming back to trip her up. Eventually, Michael decides that the only solution to their problem is to balance out the good place and the bad place. And by this I mean, he knows that there are two people in the good place that aren't supposed to be there, Eleanor and Jason. Therefore, two people need to go to the bad place. But here's the catch. Michael really doesn't care which two go. He leaves it up to these four friends to decide who gets to stay and who should go. Each of them plead their case for staying, and this leads, of course, to much bickering and arguing between them. And in this moment, Eleanor has yet another major revelation. And here's that point where that spoiler I was telling you about.
Guys.
Easy solutions here.
Guys.
The only reason I'm going is because this field Eleanor is going. If you go, it doesn't make sense for me to go.
Holy mother-forking shirt balls.
What?
Wow. Okay. Woo! Yo, Mikey, Sean, come on out.
Is everything okay?
Right as rain, Mikey, my boy.
Eleanor, what's going on?
It took me a while to figure it out. But just now, as we were all fighting and yelling at each other and each one of us demanding we should go to the bad place, I thought to myself, man, this is torture. And then it hit me. They're never gonna call a train to take us to the bad place. They can't, because we're already here. This is the bad place.
Oh, man. I can't believe you figured it out.
That's right. They were never in the good place. They've been in the bad place all along. All that hard work studying ethics and moral philosophy, trying to be a better person, doing everything to get Eleanor's point total up, it was all for naught. All of those other people in the neighborhood that were around them, those were just demons playing a part in a giant act, giant play. This has all been one giant and elaborate plan to torture these four individuals, Eleanor, Chidi, Tahani, and Jason. They've all had deep flaws that they couldn't even admit to themselves this entire time, and none of them were even remotely good enough to get into the good place. Which leads me to the next question that this show poses. Can people really improve? If what they believed was a good place was all smoke and mirrors, did anything actually ever change? Did Eleanor actually become a better person? Should she have even tried to better herself? The answer is yes. Eleanor does become a better person. She becomes less selfish. She becomes more caring. Through subsequent seasons of the show, Chidi, Tahani, and Jason all become better people together. Even Michael, who we just learned is actually a demon, actually becomes a better person because of his time spent with these four. He learns what it's like to become human and what it's like to be human and all the complicated challenges that come with that. He actually starts to care for them and to fight for them. And they are all stronger and better off because they are going through this journey together. As iron sharpens iron, so a friend sharpens a friend. We are made to be in community with each other. We are made to live life together and to lift each other up so we can become the best versions of ourselves. This group of people on the good place, the Soul Squad, as they start to refer to themselves, unite together to find a way to become better people so they can actually get into the good place. And that's a beautiful picture of how God has created us to live together and to support each other. But, you may ask, do they make it? Do they become good enough to get into the good place? Well, I'll answer that question with probably the most important question that this show raises. Can anyone be good enough? The show actually answers this question very effectively and very closely as to how we as Christians view this question. And that's with an emphatic no. By all accounts, out of all the main characters on The Good Place, Chidi is easily the best person out of all of them. He's dedicated his life to understanding and living for a greater moral good. And even he was not good enough to get into the good place. As the show goes on through season 2 and 3, Michael begins to explore this point system that regulates the good and bad place so he can better help his friends achieve their ultimate goal of getting to the good place. But even as he thinks he's getting a grasp on how the whole system works, he finds out just how complicated good enough is.
Go ahead.
I'm trying to help Jason and Janet navigate some very complex feelings, but everything I do makes it worse. You know them better than anyone else. How do I just make them happy?
How do you make Jason happy? You give him a lollipop shaped like a transformer.
You'd think it'd be that simple, but every time I do something nice, it backfires. There are so many unintended consequences to well-intentioned actions. It feels like a game you can't win.
That's it. There is another explanation. Unintended consequences. Oh, Tahani, you did it.
Well, of course I did, darling. Did what?
All along, I've only been looking at one duck, but there's millions of ducks in here. In 1534, Douglas Winegar of Hawkhurst, England, gave his grandmother roses for her birthday. He picked them himself, walked them over to her. She was happy. Boom, 145 points. Now, yeah, here we go. In 2009, Doug Ewing of Skaggsville, Maryland, also gave his grandmother a dozen roses, but he lost 4 points. Why? Because he ordered roses using a cell phone that was made in a sweatshop. The flowers were grown with toxic pesticides, picked by exploited migrant workers, delivered from thousands of miles away, which created a massive carbon footprint.
That is a very odd thing to cheer.
Don't you understand? The bad place isn't tampering with points. They don't have to. Because every day the world gets a little more complicated, and being a good person gets a little harder.
As the characters wrestle with the point system to earn their way into heaven, they find that defining actions as good or evil was almost impossible because things like motivation and context muddle even their best intentions. And there's a ripple effect that still results in negative points. It's like Newton's third law of physics. For every action, there must be a reaction, whether we ever even see the reaction at all. It's an uphill climb on a mountain that seems to have no peak. So no one can ever be good enough by their own merit alone to get into heaven. Paul tells us in Romans, all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. And he's right. We are all flawed. We have all made bad decisions. We've all given into temptation. We've all lied. We've cheated or stole or done something purely for personal gain. Under the good place system, our point totals would be just as messy as the characters on the show. And this leads us to the final question the show asks, which it can never truly answer, which is, how do we get into the good place? I just read that verse from Romans, and I want to read it again, but I want to continue with the very next verse in that passage. For all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God, and all are justified freely by the grace through the redemption that came by Jesus Christ. Only by the grace of God can we find our way to the good place God has waiting for us. Grace changes how we live. It changes how we act, and it changes why we do. When grace is the answer, it may make it seem like doing good or bad doesn't matter anymore, but it's actually the opposite. It matters because action should be our natural outpouring of our faith. Grace makes life simpler. Grace frees us to be the good people because there's no reward for it. In that very first clip we watched this morning from The Good Place, Michael told us of Doug Forsett, that Canadian stoner who accurately guessed 92% of how the afterlife works. Later on in the series, we get a chance to meet Doug on Earth and see how things are going for him, now that he's figured out how the afterlife works. Turns out, Doug is miserable. He turned into what is referred to as a happiness pump, someone who does everything to make others happy, even if it makes him more and more miserable. Some punk kid asks him for a shoe, he gives it to him. He accidentally steps on a snail, gives it a memorial service so it can have the honor and respect all creatures on life deserve. Live off the grid, compost, drink reclaimed water. He does it all and more because he just can't risk the eternal damnation. None of these things are inherently bad, but without grace, Doug is not free to do good just because it's the right thing to do. When we accept the grace that God offers us, we open ourselves to a life free of conflicting motivations and ulterior motives. We can live securely in the kingdom, and we can be the good in the world because that's how Jesus lived. I want to challenge you this morning to start watching The Good Place this week. Or if you've already watched it, start rewatching it if that's the case. First 2 seasons are on Netflix. And Season 3, I'm sure, will be showing up there fairly soon before the Season 4 premiere this fall. Think about the questions that it raises. Think about what the actual consequences of a merit-based heaven are. And think about how that could help you explain to your non-Christian friends the need for God's grace. I have a coworker who loves this show just as much as I do. We talk about it and we quote it all the time. I don't give him a full gospel presentation every time we chat about the show. We have interesting conversations about how the point system is flawed and what the ramifications are for that within the show. So the show is providing us a chance to have spiritual conversations and giving me the ability to give him some touchstones to God along the way. And that's why it's so important to engage well with the culture around us. God's fingerprints are everywhere. He will stop at nothing to reach us. He can and will use a show like The Good Place to reveal His truth and equip us to reveal and share His grace to those we share our lives with. So a few weeks ago, we got news that an old family friend had passed away. It was pretty surprising and sudden. Even though I hadn't seen him in about 6 years, John Laws was the type of guy who was just always around, and you assume he would just always be around. He hired my dad at one of his first jobs out of college, and he was a family friend before I was even born. When someone passes away, regardless of whether they are actually family or just someone who might as well be family, I think that it is only natural to look back and think about the interactions you had with them and take stock of what kind of person they were. And you do that in a way that you really don't do when they're still here with us. And I've been doing that a lot, thinking about John. You see, John was a pretty remarkable man. And it's unfortunate that it's not until now that I am realizing the magnitude of the person that he was. He was a man of faith and a man of God. He cared a lot for people. He was very involved in his church and a champion for several veterans charities. He had a heart for those whom are often overlooked or forgotten. He wanted to make sure they were remembered, valued, and their stories were told. It was a natural outpouring of his relationship with God. When I think back on the interactions we had, it didn't matter if I was a kid doing kid things like showing him off my comic book collection to him, or if I was a grown-up introducing him to my wife and my daughter. He had this unbelievable gift for making you feel so important and cared for. You could have been in a packed stadium with him, and he would make you feel like you were the only other person in that room. That's how undivided his attention was. He would hang on your every word, ask all the right questions, and truly listen to your answers. He was living out the two greatest commandments, love God and love others. And there's no doubt in my mind that as soon as he exhaled his last breath here with us, he was welcomed by God with the refrain of, "Well done, my good and faithful servant." He cared for me, he cared for my family, and he cared so much for all the people that he came in contact with. While Eleanor Shellstrop lived for herself on earth and then tried to become a better person once she died, John did everything in his power to be the best person and have the best life here on earth, and to help bring God's kingdom to the here and now. We feel like we have to wait until we die to experience God's kingdom. But Jesus tells us that he came to bring the kingdom of heaven to earth, here, now, and that we can all experience it. As I look back on the life of our family friend, and I look forward to whatever time I may have left here on mine, that's the kind of life I want to be living. Through the grace of Jesus Christ, God has invited us into his family and equipped us to do good in his name. We can be Jesus to everyone we encounter in a real and personal way. Whether it's helping with the mobile food bank like many of us did yesterday, or just being there for someone who needs an ear to listen. And we can do this now, without worry about doing enough good things or earning enough points to get into the good place, because our place is secure. It's not a bad thing to have joy thinking about one day being united with God in the next life. But let's not sit idly by, letting this life pass us by. Let's be people who care. Let's be people who love. Let's be people who do good as a natural outpouring of the love and sacrifice that God has given us. We can begin forever right here and right now. While we watch a show like The Good Place, we laugh along with Chidi, Eleanor, Tahani, and Jason. But let's let their errors and their mistakes remind us of how God is calling us to live now.